The government shutdown continuing, entering its second month as the federal food assistance program is facing delays impacting millions of Americans. The plan to freeze payments to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP today, was halted by federal judges, but the delay in payouts will still likely leave millions of people unable to pay their grocery bills. The Department of Agriculture planning to withhold payments to the food program until two federal judges ordered the administration to make them. President Trump has said he will provide the money, but wanted more legal direction from the court. That's not going to happen until at least Monday. The program serves 1 in 8 Americans and costs about $8 billion per month. There is a lot to this here, so I do want to have us break it down for you. We do have Neama Rahmani, former federal prosecutor, now the president of West Coast Trial Lawyers, joining us as always to help discuss this. Neama, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. There is so much to this.
Thanks, Josh, for having me. You're right. I mean, this is a big case, actually 2 cases that affect tens of millions of Americans.
For sure. We were saying 1 in about 8 Americans use the SNAP program. So can you start by kind of going back to basics and explaining exactly what this ruling does mean overall?
This is the important thing to know, Josh. And I came on LiveNOW yesterday when the news broke. A lot of people were upset. They said, well, how can an unelected judge, or in this case, 2 unelected judges, tell Congress what to do? And it's not judges telling Congress what to do. It's judges telling the Department of Agriculture what to do based on a law that Congress passed. And we're talking about the 2008 Food and Nutrition Act. And that says that the department shall fund the SNAP program. So here we're talking about a $5 billion contingency fund that the Department of Agriculture has. And 25 states and the District of Columbia, they filed a lawsuit asking judges to order the Department of Agriculture to release those funds. Now, $5 billion will only get us through a few weeks because, like you said, the program costs $8 billion or maybe even closer to $9 billion a month to fund for 42 million Americans. So it's not going to get us to the end of November, but because that money exists and because previously the department has used those contingency funds during shutdowns, those judges in Massachusetts and Rhode Island ruled that the department has to use those funds starting today when other funding sources dried up because of the government shutdown. Now, the Department of Agriculture and the Trump administration took a different position. They said that those funds can only be used for true emergencies. So we're talking about natural disasters. And they argued that political gridlock in D.C. is not a natural disaster and it's not an appropriate use of the funds. So it was a very specific ruling related to the language of the statute and these contingency funds.
And as we look into all of this, we know that it could be until at least Monday when there's any sort of clarification. So we are in the weekend now. It's November 1st, the first day that those funds do run dry here. What does this ruling or these rulings suggest about maybe the oversight between the branches of government?
No question. You know, obviously, judges can't force Congress to legislate. And of course, Congress can pass a spending bill, they can pass a continuing resolution, they can even pass a legislation related to the SNAP program, something very discreet. But no judge can force Congress to do any of that. All they can do is force the executive branch to follow existing law. So what the states are trying to do is really kind of thread the needle and tailor their argument to the laws that are currently on the books. Of course, a fifth option would be for the states to fund the program, and some of the states are doing it, but I don't think even the largest states have the funds to really fund the SNAP program or the food stamp program for any considerable period of time. So what we saw, and of course, I'm not naive. I understand that this whole these are legal cases, but this is all political. And people are asking, well, who are these judges? One is Judge Talwani, an Obama appointee in Massachusetts, and the other is Judge Jack McDowell, another Obama appointee in Rhode Island. So they've issued their rulings. Now, whenever there's any type of temporary restraining order or an injunction, those rulings are immediately appealable as a matter of law. And we know the government is going to appeal this. It'll go to the First Circuit Court of Appeals. And then from there, I would not be surprised if the U.S. Supreme Court weighs in here. They may even jump in and issue some sort of emergency order, putting these lower court rulings on hold because it's such an issue of constitutional significance, of really legal significance as well, because it does affect so many Americans.
I wanted to ask you, as we continue to watch all of this unfold, there are still so many questions. Of course, we're glad that you're able to help kind of explain them. But does this set any sort of maybe legal precedent for the future based on whatever does happen here?
Well, there is precedent set, but it's really limited to the agency itself. And the argument that the states and the DC lawyers are making are that this is a violation of the Administrative Procedures Act. For the Department of Agriculture to do a 180 and to say that the contingency funds are only used for different types of emergencies like natural disasters, that decision runs counter to federal law, and it's an arbitrary and capricious reading of the regulations that are already on the books. So, obviously it will have some precedential impact, but it certainly won't be anything more than the Department of Agriculture itself and the reading of federal law and regulations as it applies to the SNAP program. I don't want people to think that this is something more than what it is. It is not judges in the judiciary, Article 3, telling Congress what to do or saying that, you have to, appropriate this money or spend this type of money. It's really limited to this specific issue and the laws that are already on the books.
And you touched on this about the potential for the Supreme Court to get involved, all of that. What do we need to be watching for as far as all this goes over the next, I would say, several days here?
Well, we should see if first these orders are stayed. That's a legal term for pause, and that's pretty typical. Often judges will issue an order, but they know that there's a higher court that's going to take a look at it. And when it's something of significance like this, the lower court itself may stay the order. I don't necessarily think they will in this case because it's November 1st and folks need their SNAP benefits. Then the Court of Appeals will take a look at it. And usually that's a 3-judge panel. Again, they can issue a stay or put that order on hold while they consider the case. Now, obviously, this is not something that's going to be able to go through the normal briefing process that will take months. This will have to be an expedited appeal. And then after that 3-judge panel rules, then the parties can petition for hearing en banc. That means they can have all the circuit judges in that circuit hear the case. And then, of course, every case like this can be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. Now, the U.S. Supreme Court has discretionary jurisdiction. They don't have to hear the appeal, and they only accept a very small percentage of appeals. But again, when you're talking about an issue like this that's affecting so many Americans, and something that's relatively new, a novel interpretation of the law, the chances of the Supreme Court justices deciding to take on an appeal like this increases exponentially.
All right, Neama Rahmani, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join us here. Anything we missed, anything you want to make sure to add for folks out there before I let you go?
Josh, I think the important thing to know is this is just the beginning of the legal fight. I think a lot of folks thought, well, you know what, I'm going to get my SNAP benefits starting Monday. And I would tell them, I hope Americans do. They don't go hungry, especially as we get closer to the holidays. But this is just the beginning of the fight. There's multiple layers of appeal that are going to inevitably follow.
All right, Neama, thank you again for taking the time to join us and break it all down. And I'm sure we'll be talking to you as all of that does play out. Thanks again.
I'm sure we will, Josh. Thanks again.